How's it going, everyone? Taki here. They're a little late with their GPD Win 4 competitor, but AYA is finally here with the AYANEO Slide. This was originally announced all the way back in the summer of 2022, but AYA is finally ready to get this thing out the door at the end of 2023. I already filmed a short video on this, unboxing it, but I want to go through that experience again because there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. I think this is pretty cool. This is part of AYA's new retro product line. I don't know if that extends to the product. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but we can see on the front that they say this is a combination of classic and artistic design. On the front, we can see that this is AS01, so there'll probably be an AS02, knowing AYA, and it says Slide to Future, which is a little Chinglish, but it still works. That same text carries over to the side panel, and on the back of this, we have a render of the device itself. The unboxing experience gets a little convoluted from this point, so I'm just going to go over how I think it's supposed to be set up. We have the product name here, along with that product tag, and then this is kind of where you would have a label on a cassette tape, along with a date and their product logo. If we pull this out, we're greeted with what would be the back of a cassette tape, and it says AYANEO Slide there at the top. If we flip this over, we have something that could be considered the front of a cassette or a VHS tape. It again has the product name with the model number and the processor that this comes with, along with some of the spec details. Now at this point, if we're following the directions, we would open it up from this side, pulling this tab. If we do that, we see this stencil outline of the AYANEO Slide, but the box is actually upside down at this point. We have to flip the entire thing over to get to the Real Gamers No Gamers tag, and then if we lift that up, we have the device itself. So not as seamless as it has been on the past, but that is the unboxing experience. Besides the device, we also have a 65-watt charger in the box, along with some travel adapters and a USB cable. They usually include a cutout for these, but they've also included some USB Type-C adapters inside that travel adapter box. I don't need any of these, so I'm going to put these back in the package and we're going to get started with the device. Anyway, here's the product itself. As I mentioned, this is part of AYA's retro product line, which includes this mini PC over here and a couple of other products. At first, when this was announced, I was kind of taken aback because I don't really see how this design is considered retro. The packaging is clearly retro, but I'm kind of scratching my head on this one, and I think that is open for debate. I made a post about this, and a lot of people were saying that it reminds them of the T-Mobile Sidekick, and I can definitely see that. It clearly looks like it was inspired by the T-Mobile Sidekick, but I don't know if I would consider that to be a retro product. Maybe I'm just older than I think I am, but do you guys consider the T-Mobile Sidekick to be a retro product? Leave your thoughts down below. Let's get started with the specs. The AYANEO Slide comes with a Ryzen 7840U processor with a max TDP of 28 watts. The SKU that I have comes with 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM running at the slower 6400, and it has 2 terabytes of NVMe SSD storage with support for a microSD card slot. This handheld uses a 6-inch 1080p panel with a default refresh rate of 60 Hz out of the box with no default support for additional refresh rates. Our battery comes in at 46.2 watt hours, and we have Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2 for connectivity. If you want one of these, it's going to set you back quite a bit, but it's par for the course for these smaller handheld companies. Pricing on Slides starts at $699 with early bird pricing and maxes out at $1299 for the highest end version. The version that I have comes in at $959. I have a lot of stuff that I want to cover in this video, but one of the first things that I want to do is take a look at the devices that are comparable to the Slide. Previously on the channel, we've taken a look at the GPD Win 3 and the GPD Win 4. The GPD Win 3 is completely replaced by the GPD Win 4. It's a much better product, so we're just going to exclude that one for now. The sliding mechanism is the same, so you're not really missing anything out in this comparison. I just wanted to show them all in this scene right here. But yeah, here we have the AYANEO Slide and the GPD Win 4. I have the original GPD Win 4 with the AMD 6800U processor. GPD did a refresh of this with the same processor that is in the AYANEO Slide, and I don't have it, so we're kind of limited in what we can do in terms of comparisons. We can obviously compare the sliding mechanism on the GPD Win 4 versus the AYANEO Slide, but that's not the only thing we can take a look at. We can also take a look at how both of these handle thermals, since that won't really change in the refresh model of this. But yeah, on the GPD Win 4, we have a sliding mechanism that is very sturdy and it reveals a physical keyboard. And on the AYANEO Slide, we have a sliding mechanism that has a bit more force to it, also revealing a physical keyboard. Try to line this up as best as I could so we can do a direct comparison. As you can see, the control layout is pretty much the same on these, We have a few more input options on the GPD Win 4 versus on the Slide, but the keyboards are pretty much the same in terms of how they feel to use. The physical keyboard area on the GPD Win 4 is more compact than it is on the AYANEO Slide, since this sliding screen goes back a bit further, but they're pretty much the same. Now, if we just take a look at that sliding mechanism again, we can see on the GPD Win 4 that requires a bit more force to get this to lock into place, but once it's there, it's pretty sturdy. Can't move it around at all. And we can do the same thing when we move it down. Still requires a bit more force, but it's in place there, very sturdy. This guy is a totally different beast. So here it is in the second position. There's a third position that we'll take a look at in just a second, but we can slide this down into the closed position. You can see that it clicks into place, kind of satisfying, just like on a T-Mobile Sidekick if you owned one. And if we press up a little, we can get it to go into place, and it does the rest of that transition for you. So that is a big difference between both of these devices just in how the hinge actually works. Again, closed, open, close, open, and on the GPD Win 4, open, close, open, close. When the AYANEO Slide is fully open, we don't have any play on the screen in any direction. It's pretty much locked in there. But when it's closed, there is some slight play to it if you press up on the corners, just like on the GPD Win 3. This kind of movement is also possible on the GPD Win 4, but to a lesser degree because this screen sits almost flush with the front shell. If we take a profile view of these, you can see how they both designed their handhelds around that 6-inch panel. On the AYANEO Slide, this is kind of floating over the keyboard, and I believe they say that it's a floating design, but on the GPD Win 4, that's locked into place on all sides, and it sits closer to the keyboard. Here's another profile view so you can see the difference between the two of these. And here's a closer look at the back half of the screen on both units. You can see how that works. And on the GPD Win 4, so we have some slight differences between these two, but the AYANEO Slide has one further party trick up its sleeve, and it's actually a meaningful one. The screen can articulate forward. Personally, I could go either way. I like how the screen works on the GPD Win 4, and I've had a lot of fun with it, but being able to push the screen forward like this is a cool quality of life improvement. When you have the screen fully opened on the AYANEO Slide, you cannot close it. It's locked into place, so you have to push it down first, and then you will be able to slide it into place. We'll come back to the GPD Win 4 in a later part of this video. Let's now move on to the next section. To give you guys a better idea of the scale of this, let's compare it to a bunch of more mainstream handhelds. Starting out first with the Switch Lite, the Switch OLED, the OLED Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, and finally, the Lenovo Legion Go. Now it's time for our first big section going over the controls and the build quality of this handheld. Very quickly on the front half, we have two Switch-style analog joysticks. These are Hall effect joysticks, and they're a bit on the sensitive side out of the box. I've had to dial in some of the settings in the games that I was playing to get them to work better. We'll talk more about that later on in the video. We have a decent set of ABXY buttons on the right side with a D-pad on the left side. This one seems to have no issues with pivoting, and I haven't had any issues with either set during my initial testing. On the bottom side, you'll find the AYANEO button to call up their software, along with a hotkey that is currently set to show the desktop. On the other side, you'll find Start and Select. Moving on to the top, we have conductive rubber for L1 and R1, and these both work well. We also have a set of analog triggers that use magnets for input. They don't require a lot of force to fully press, and they feel good to use. From there, we have two macro buttons that you can customize. These are configured by default to do things like show the task manager or show the keyboard. To the side of the LC button, you'll find the combo fingerprint power button, the volume buttons, what looks to be a microphone hole, and the USB charging port. This time around, we only have a single USB port on the top, but there is another one on the bottom in the same position. The rest of the top half is dedicated to the air exhaust, and this hopefully means that we won't have any thermal issues on this. We'll talk more about thermals later on. When it comes to the back of the AYANEO Slide, I do have a couple of things that I want to point out. This unit is painted black, and the style that they went for in this is the same that they've used in a lot of their products. It is a fingerprint magnet at times, and it also is prone to some slight damage to the bottom grip area, as you can see here. I have to point out that this is a prototype unit, but from my experience, some of the same stuff can happen with retail models. Those two things are the biggest reasons why I don't like to go with black models from this company. The surface coating and the surface type feel nice to use when you're using them, but they don't do this thing any favors in terms of fingerprints. After something like 20 products from this company, I can comfortably say that this will probably never happen, but I wish they would start making stuff with a textured surface like you can find on the Steam Deck or retro handhelds for that matter, because they do a much better job of rejecting fingerprints and hiding damage than a perfectly smooth surface does. Aside from that, we have a huge area here for air intake, and this looks like it has a bigger fan, but we'd have to open it up to get a closer look. Now this could be a pro or a con depending on the person that's viewing this, but if you're new to this brand, you will see that there are no visible screws on this back. They really go out of their way to hide all visible screws on their products. I haven't taken this apart yet, so I don't know how difficult it is. The last thing that I looked at from them wasn't that bad, but there have been models that were more difficult to open than others. Hopefully all of the screws are just under this top part here and it's an easier process to get inside and open this up. That leaves us with the bottom. We have speakers on either end with a USB port, so this should be decent for a docking situation, and we also have a micro SD card slot. You will notice that this handheld does not have a headphone jack, and that's not something that I personally want to see on handhelds like this. I'm not super pumped about it, to be honest. We already touched on the hinge mechanism of this in the GPD Win 4 section, but I'll briefly go over it again. We have that sliding mechanism that kind of just like shoots out for the last half. It seems to be quite sturdy, but that force is much stronger than it is on other handhelds that this is competing with. The feeling is similar to the Sidekick, but I would be cautious about letting it go full force all the time, because if that breaks, you're pretty much SOL. In the center of this, we have a small RGB keyboard. It's not really big enough to do any kind of meaningful typing, but you can do some thumb typing in a pinch. Having a physical keyboard like this is one of those things that you can't really appreciate until you're in a situation where you don't have one. With a hybrid like this, you get the best of both worlds. Beyond that, we have the ability to articulate the screen forward. This also seems to be quite sturdy, and they've done some things to make it so that way you won't end up damaging this. That being said, it's an expensive handheld, so you should treat this with care. I have no idea how long this will hold up over repeated use, but it felt robust during all of my testing. The next thing that I want to talk about is comfort, and this is surprisingly a pretty good aspect of this. Now, I originally used a CNC prototype version of this, I think back in September of 2022, and I don't remember it being this comfortable to hold. Prior to filming any of this video, I played this for about 10 hours or so, and I was kind of blown away by how good it felt in the hands. It's probably important to point out that during that time I didn't need to do any finger typing at all. This was just strictly gaming with the controls on the left and the right side, and it feels really good to hold it. They have a pretty comfortable shape here in the back, and funny enough, the handheld that reminds me of this the most is Loki. On Loki, the top and the bottom are a bit more pronounced, so this one feels more comfortable to hold in the hand, but the AYANEO Slide isn't that far behind. Another thing that ended up improving the ergonomic experience was that articulating screen. On the Win 4, I would almost always play it in the closed position, but that's not the case with Slide. I find that it's way better to just keep this thing open and pointed to your face. The angle that you get with that feels a lot better for longer gaming periods. The longest that I played in a single sitting so far was about 3 hours, and I had this screen open the entire time, and it felt great to game on. In fact, it feels so good having this thing open that I don't think that I would really ever play it in the closed position, because it just feels way better to just have this angle going on. In this section, I want to take a look at some benchmarks. Before we do that, we have to find out some information on the power consumption of this handheld. For a detailed explanation of this, you can look at my GPD Win mini video, but we are basically just trying to find out how much power this device uses to play a simple 2D game at the minimum TDP possible with the brightness on max. We will then do the same thing with the brightness at the minimum level. After we do that, we'll look at some 3D Mark scores at a few TDP levels. After we go ahead and set the TDP to 4 watts and manually lower the GPU clock to 200 MHz, we can run this game at 60 FPS while using just under 10 watts of power with airplane mode on at 100% brightness. After we set the brightness to the minimum level, we don't see significant power savings. We're sitting at around 9 watts of power. The joystick LED is probably adding about half a watt to this. Unfortunately, the software doesn't allow us to disable the LED at this point. Anyway, onto the benchmarks. At 5 watts TDP, I got an overall score of 976 with a graphics score of 917 and a CPU score of 1551. Next up from here, we have 15 watt. We got an overall score of 2190 with a GPU score of 1972 and a CPU score of 5894. Our final score is 25 watts, and we got an overall score of 2986 with a GPU score of 2609 and a CPU score of 7714. As promised, here's a look at the thermal performance of the AYANEO Slide versus the GPD Win 4. For this, I left both units in a benchmark for 30 minutes at 25 watt TDP. Starting out with the GPD Win 4, we have a hotspot on the right side at around 53 Celsius with 37 near the palm. This tapers out as we move to the other side. Under the keyboard, we have surface temps in the low 50s. If we go over to the back, we have a hotspot over the battery with a max temp near 52 Celsius, but that again tapers out as we go to the other side. Now for the slide. On the top half, we have a hotspot in the low 50s, but the palm area is a bit warmer at around 41 Celsius. The screen temps are pretty uniform until we get to the left side. When it comes to the keyboard area, that is about 1C warmer than it was on the Win 4. We still have a hotspot over the back of the battery, but it is a few degrees warmer than it was on the Win 4. All in all, the Win 4 has slightly better temps, but that could be due to the increased ventilation on the back. The important thing here is power consumption. On the GPD Win 4 at 25 watts, we're pulling 41 watts from the battery, but we're pulling almost 50 watts on slide. You'd have to do a lot more testing to find out which components are causing this increased power consumption, but that is beyond the scope of this video. Finally, we're going to take a look at some performance tests on slide. This processor isn't anything new at the end of 2023, and if you've seen one, you've kind of seen them all. There are really only so many times a person can test the same processor in a different handheld without getting burnt out, so I'm going to challenge myself to only test games that I've never filmed before. As I mentioned earlier in this video, these Hall effect joysticks are a bit on the sensitive side out of the box. I have tried to adjust sensitivity settings in games to compensate for it, but it still doesn't hold a candle to the bigger joysticks that are out there. Even if it meant not having a Hall part, they really should have gone for at least the joystick that is an Ally, since we would have had more than enough space for it. But yeah, while the games play out in the background, I'm going to go over some of my thoughts about this after testing it and filming this video. This is a niche handheld within a niche market, but it is a good product in its own right. The only thing that competes with this is the refresh version of the GPD Win 4. The difficult thing for Aya is that most people that would want something like this had almost a full year to buy that type of handheld directly from GPD. There are some things that this does better than the Win 4, namely a much better screen, better ergonomics, and better shoulder buttons, but there are also things that the Win 4 does better, namely the joysticks and lower surface temps. I think the interesting thing would have been if Aya prioritized launching this handheld over some of the Air refresh models or the AYANEO 2S. From what I can see, it seems like a better product than those, and it would have allowed for a nice competition between both companies. Aside from that, there are some other points that I want to go over. This is the same display that we have on the AYANEO Air Plus, and as I mentioned, this is locked to only 60 Hz out of the box. The panel can actually support refresh rates down to 45 Hz, and I don't know why the company did not offer those by default in the software. I asked why 45 Hz and 50 Hz weren't default, and I didn't really get a good answer from them. End users can do this on their own with CRU, but Aya should strive to do those kinds of things in-house since they are just as much a software company as they are a handheld company. If you're on the fence about buying Slide, I really hope that you know one way or the other based on everything that you saw in this video. I think this handheld is for a specific type of person, and I think you will know whether or not this is for you based on everything that I've shown. Personally, I'm a fan of this, and I think it's one of their better handhelds. It's either in first or second place for me, but Aya has a tendency to compete with themselves and make buying their products more difficult than it should be. They have two other handhelds on the way that offer some of what you can get here in a slightly different package. If you're more of a clamshell fan, then you may want to wait to see how those turn out. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you found this video helpful. It really does help out. And if you want to see more of my videos, take a look at a recent video that I did on the cheaper RG35XX Plus. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.